Alright, so today's video is going to cover how to create a histogram on your graphing calculator. Again, and I'm assuming you know what a histogram is from our class notes and stuff. This is just a reminder of how to make it using technology on our graphing calculator. So the example that we used today, we have a bunch of data, and what this data represents is we asked 30 employees how many attachments they've sent in their emails over 1 week. So we can see 30 different employees responded with how many attachments they sent. What they are tasking us to do is display the data in a histogram, and they want us to use 6 intervals or 6 categories or bins, and the first category should go from 1 to 20. We need to do this on our calculator. So the first thing we need to do is enter the data into a list, and recall the way that we do that is we hit the Stat button and we choose option 1, which is Edit. I'm just going to get this into my notes. I've already taken the time to enter the data into my calculator just to obviously save time on this video. If you're going to follow along with this, go ahead and pause the video and enter all of this data. You can see that I just entered it all into the first list. Doesn't matter what list you use as long as you keep track of what list you put it in. Now that you've taken the time to put the data into your calculator, the next step after entering the data into a list is to turn on and set up our histogram. And what that means is we need to go to second y equals. And again, when we hit that second y equals, that is what's going to bring up our stat plots. And the calculator just thinks of stats plots as different types of pictures that we can make. So you'd hit those buttons and it'd bring you to a screen that should look like this. It doesn't matter which plot number you use. What I recommend at this point is just making sure that most of them are off. We're just going to use one of them. I'm going to choose option 1 here, so I'm making sure that plot 2 and plot 3 are off. If they weren't, you would simply scroll down to them, enter them, and then go highlight off. So make sure yours are off. Once you have them off, I'm going to choose the first plot. And we obviously need to make sure that it's on. So I make sure my blinking cursor is on, and I hit enter. For the type, we need to choose a histogram, and the histogram is a bar graph, so the only one that looks like a bar graph is that third choice right there. So I put my cursor on it and hit enter to confirm the choice. Now the X list is asking me where did you put your data, so I would enter wherever that data is. So for me, I put it into L1. Right, that's where I originally stored the data. If you put your data somewhere else, you would just change that to whatever list you put your data. The frequency list should always stay at 1. And then you can choose whatever color you want. And that is all we need to do to actually set up and turn on our histogram. But before we can actually make a histogram, we need to scale our axes appropriately. In other words, we need to send up our window. So the next thing we need to do is actually hit the window button. When we hit the window button, it's going to bring us to a screen that looks like this. And for my notes on the right side here, I have that on the next page to make it a lot bigger because what we fill in each one is indicated by our data. So it's just a bigger version of what I had on the last page. So the first thing we want to do with our X minimum is we want to set that to whatever the first bin should start at. So according to our prompt here, excuse me, I went the wrong way. According to our prompt, our first bin needs to start at 1 and end at 20. So the first bin starts at the number 1, so our X minimum, we're going to start at the number 1. The X maximum should be set to our biggest data value. So if I go look at my original data, I can just search through it, and I can see that the biggest data value is 120. Now what I indicated right here is that we might alter this later. This is just a starting point, but we'll come back to that at the end. We want to make sure that we can see the end of the last box, and sometimes it gets cut off, but we'll address that at the end. Now our X scale, SCL stands for scale, should be set to the width of the categories. So for instance, if our first category is supposed to be from 1 to 20, there's 20 different responses that would get you into that category. You could send 1 attachment, you could send 2 attachments, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. So there's 20 different data values that would place you into the category of 1 to 20. So for our scale, the width of that bin is 20 different answers. Now in a histogram, we know that the y-axis is always measuring frequency, so the number of data points in each category. The smallest number of data points in a category can be 0. Obviously, like there could be nothing in that bin, so we always set our y minimum to 0. The Y maximum, we have to make an educated guess to begin with. I need to know how many data points are in the categories. Well, I don't know that yet. So by an educated guess, if there's 30 data points, I would assume those 30 data points are in a few different categories. So maybe the category with the most data points is something like 20. This is something we might need to adjust after we see it because we want to see the top of every bar. The Y scale doesn't matter. It's just like what would you count by on your Y axis. So if I was going from 0 to 20, I think counting by 1s would be fine. Counting by 2s would also be appropriate. Maybe by 5s. But whatever you want to scale your axes, I'm just going to count by 1 because it's a pretty small amount of frequency values on the Y axis. Everything else doesn't matter. So once we've done that, we should just be able to hit graph. And then we can see we have a histogram. And I'm going to check some things over. We're supposed to make a histogram with 6 intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This was the one little thing I was talking about. It looks like this bin gets cut off. So here, when we set it to the end, what we're saying is we must see the end of the final bin. So you might need to go back into your window and extend. 120 wasn't enough. So I just need to guess and check until I can find a number that shows me the end of that bin. So I chose 130, and that looks perfect. The last thing I'd have you see when we're doing these is if I hit the trace button, I can go back through my data and see each bin and how many members there were, which is helpful if we need to create a table that summarizes our data. So if I create a quick little table, what we can do is we know that one of our data points is the number of email attachments. And a histogram is measuring the frequency, so how many data points were in that category. So if I use the trace button, what I can see here is it shows you the minimum of that category. So my first category has a minimum of 1, and the maximum in that category is something that's less than 21. So the number of email attachments that's less than 21 would be 20. So my first bin goes from 1 to 20, and the end value means that there's 2 data points there. So if I scroll to the right, I get to my next bin. The smallest number in that bin is exactly 21. And then it shows me that the maximum number in that bin is the first number of email attachments that's less than 41. So that'd be 40. And then it shows me that there are 3 members of that group. So I can keep doing this. So the next group starts at 41, and it includes all the numbers that are less than 61. So as email attachments, we can't have any decimals. So that'd be the number 60. And there are 9 individuals. The next category starts at 61 and ends at 80 because it's less than 81, and there are 10 individuals there. The next group goes from 81 to 100 because, again, if we are less than 101, the only number of email attachments that's less than 101 would be 100, and there are 4 members in that group. The last group starts at 101 and is anything that is less than 121, which is 120 for our case, and there are 2 individuals there. So those are the main important features of creating a histogram on your graphing calculator.